and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who was soon to be replaced by then Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. The two leaders have an off-the-record conversation that raises more than a few eyebrows.
My last election, yeah. After my election, I have no flexibility. I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and my family.
But even more intriguing were recorded but not filmed comments in which President Obama told Medvedev, quote, "It's important for him to give me space," and to which Medvedev replied, "I understand your message about space."
The revelation was extraordinary. President Obama's quote was, "It's important for him to give me space." What does that mean? Some people think it simply means breathing space, space to operate, room to maneuver politically. But there is an interpretation that suggests he meant literally, it's important for him to give me space, outer space.
Anytime you hear governments talk about space, you hear them talk about space exploration, trust me that the underlying, implied, unspoken reality behind that is the alien presence.
It is possible that Russia and America, in some aspects of the space question and maybe the extraterrestrial question, maybe they are working together after all.
Is it possible that even between two of the world's most powerful political rivals, there is a secret understanding, one based on America and Russia's past and future roles in outer space? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes. And they also believe that this secret understanding extends to numerous experiences involving extraterrestrial contact. As evidence, they point to an occasion that took place just a few months after Medvedev's now famous exchange with Barack Obama. On December 7th, 2012, after giving a primetime network interview in Moscow, Medvedev made remarks off stage which seemed to openly acknowledge the existence of extraterrestrials and the Russian government's efforts to keep that existence a secret.
Вместе с передачей чемодана с ядерными кодами президенту страны приносят специальную папку. На ней написано «Совершенно секретно». И она целиком и полностью посвящена пришельцам, которые посетили нашу планету.
Although most of the journalists in the room believed the Russian president's remarks to have been made in jest, there were others who were not so certain.
This is one of the most dramatic statements that emanates out of Russia, and so it's fascinating. Dmitry Medvedev said, when you become president of Russia, you're given information on aliens in our country and the human groups that are monitoring them. He was totally with a straight face during all of this.
Сколько их среди нас, рассказывать не буду, потому что это может вызвать панику.
Here he is on film saying that there is a secret governmental cooperation occurring in the background that has the highest levels of classification to really monitor extraterrestrials that are visiting our planet.
Forget all the differences. Forget ideologies. At the highest level, the two nations work together. After World War II, there was a number of UFO encounters, very important encounters, and this gave impetus to joint cooperation between our nations.
Joint cooperation? Even during the tension-filled decades of the Cold War? Ancient astronaut theorists believe that not only did such a secret relationship exist, but that it began several decades ago. As a consequence of what they believe to be the Soviet Union's first documented UFO encounter, an event they commonly refer to as the Russian Roswell. Southern Russia, June 19, 1948. At a remote Soviet military installation known as Kapustin Yar, an unidentified flying object is detected over the base.
something was tracked, performing extraordinary speeds and maneuvers. And a Russian fighter jet was sent to intercept it. The pilot saw a silver cigar-shaped object and was told, shoot this thing down. It's in restricted military airspace. The UFO fired some sort of directed energy weapon, a death ray. But before the Russian jet was down, it managed to launch a missile and shoot down the UFO. Some people have speculated this was the time that the Russians found out about extraterrestrials.
According to the myths and legends, at Kapustin Yar, they actually recovered bodies, they recovered the spacecraft itself, and it was kept there for study and reverse engineering.
We are told that there is a underground facility under Kapustin Yar, similar probably to facilities here in the States, where a full examination could be performed on the pilots of these craft.
To ancient astronaut theorists and researchers, what makes the Kapustin Yar story all the more significant is that it occurred within a year of the now infamous Roswell incident, in which a UFO reportedly crashed in the New Mexico desert sometime in June of 1947.
That took place near the only active military unit in the world that had nuclear weapons. That was the Roswell 509th Bombing Unit. And they had nukes. Similarly, all over the Soviet Union, at places like Kapustin Yar, we've got significant UFO activity being reported, military engagements, just like in the United States. And I personally believe that extraterrestrials had a strong interest in the nuclear technologies that were then developing on planet Earth, which is exactly why they were there.
Could it be that both the Kapustin Yar and Roswell incidents were attempts by extraterrestrials to make contact because of mankind's recent development of nuclear weapons? But if such contact did occur, did it signal an era of secret cooperation between the world's two great superpowers? Or did it only trigger a greater degree of rivalry and competition?
In Roswell, you had the crash, you had the recovered alien bodies, but the aliens were dead. There was no way to communicate with them because they had been killed. So we had the technology, but probably no really good idea on how to start reverse engineering it. Whereas at Kapustin Yar, as the story goes, they not only got the spacecraft itself, but apparently there was at least one survivor of the incident. So what could the Russians possibly have learned from that alien extraterrestrial biological entity that we were not able to learn from our Roswell incident?
Why were the Russians first into space? Why did they manage to do Sputnik 1 and then send Yuri Gagarin up into orbit and leave the Americans standing? Because on paper, you'd think that the US government should have won that race, but they didn't. If the Russians got live aliens, maybe they found out something from what happened at Kapustin Yar that gave them the edge in the space race.
Is it possible that the Soviet Union gained a strategic advantage in the so-called space race because of help it received from an extraterrestrial visitor? But if so, then how did the United States so quickly catch up, and some would argue, overtake them by being the first to put humans on the moon? As far as ancient astronaut theorists are concerned, the answers are easily obtained, not by examining what the two nations were each admitting to in public, but what they were doing together, in secret. July 17th, 1975.
Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys.
High above the Earth, an American Apollo Command Service module docks with its Soviet counterpart, the Soyuz 19. A few hours later, the two mission commanders, Thomas Stafford and Alexei Leonov, shake hands through the open hatch, the first international handshake to take place in space. The The historic mission, officially known as the Apollo-Soyuz Test Project, marked the end of the space race that began when the Soviets launched Sputnik back in 1957 and ushered in a new era of open collaboration in space between the United States and the Soviet Union.
The 1975 Apollo-Soyuz mission was in itself an expression of cooperation of our two nations. They dawned was coming. Hopes for cooperation, hopes for future space exploration, friendship.
While Apollo-Soyuz was the first public demonstration of American and Soviet cooperation in space, there were many who believed that that collaboration began decades earlier, following two separate events that involved extraterrestrial visitations. One in Roswell, New Mexico, and another known as Kapustin-Yan, which happened near the town of Izhneminsk in the western region of the former Soviet Union.
There's an argument that suggests the Apollo-Soyuz mission was actually a sort of soft disclosure, getting the story out there in a quiet way so that there would be no great bombshell revelation later.
Moscow, July 1965. Exactly 1 decade prior to the historic Apollo-Soyuz mission, scientists at the Sternberg Astronomical Institute analyzed a series of 25 photographs of the moon transmitted from the Soviet unmanned probe Zond-3. The images, taken approximately 7,000 miles away from the lunar surface, are unprecedented in quality and offer the first clear view of the far side of the moon. In the years following the Zond-3 mission, researchers have argued that the 25 photographs show structures on the moon that did not occur naturally.
There were clear anomalies that had been seen on camera for the first time. One was kind of a giant dome that appeared to have a glass-like structure to the top of it that had been shattered and beaten up. And in another image, there was a 20-mile-high tower that was plainly visible on photographs that were published.
Knowing the secrecy of the Soviets during this era, it's quite possible that they had other pictures that might reveal what these structures are. Why do we not have a good HD photograph of whatever that big tower is that the Zond-3 probe took in 1965? Why? Those pictures are still classified in Russia as they were in the Soviet Union. Apparently, some 25 pictures were transferred to NASA. I don't know how. Was this a CIA operation or was this an actual transfer of information, which again shows you the level of exchange of cooperation between our governments? Something that's classified in Russia is openly available in the United States.
Did the Russians discover evidence of artificial structures on the moon 4 years before the American astronauts landed there? And if so, did they secretly communicate their findings in order to help guide NASA's plans for the first manned mission to the moon? Ancient astronaut theorists believe that such an audacious notion may be true, and also suggest that while the United States later became focused on launching its space shuttle program, the Russians journeyed even deeper into space in search of further evidence of extraterrestrial activity in our solar system. Baikonur Cosmodrome, July 1988. The Soviet Union launches 2 probes, which are each programmed to photograph Phobos, one of the 2 moons that orbit the planet Mars. Although the first probe fails to reach its target, the second proves more successful. Named Phobos 2, it uses sophisticated cameras and infrared lasers to collect and transmit photos and data about the atmosphere and surface of the Martian moon. In the final stage of its mission, the probe attempts a landing on the moon's surface. Suddenly, without warning, the Russian craft stops transmitting. But not until it relays one last incredible photo.
As they got closer with Phobos, we
cone-shaped shadow, as if it's possibly a large craft of some kind hovering above the surface.
There have been members of the Soviet Science Academy and actual cosmonauts like Maria Popovich who came right out and said that the reports inside the Soviet Union indicated that Phobos 2 had been shot down.
What happened to the Phobos 2 probe? Did it really photograph an alien craft? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes, and point to another Mars mission almost a decade later as proof of an extraterrestrial presence on Phobos. In 1998, NASA's Mars Global Surveyor took images of Phobos, revealing a monolith 279 feet in length. Instantly, ancient astronaut theorists and others connected this to what the Soviets had discovered in the 1980s and hypothesized that perhaps there is a working extraterrestrial element on Mars that seeks to prevent us from discovering the secrets of Phobos.
Now we have a situation where both Russia and the US know about this, and perhaps it's not just artifacts and ancient civilizations, but working extraterrestrial technology.
Or otherworldly forces guiding both the US and Soviet space programs in an effort to encourage peaceful cooperation between the world's two nuclear adversaries. Although such a far-fetched notion seems absurd, there are many who believe that not only was extraterrestrial contact taking place, but that it had been happening for dozens of years. And that one such incident involved a number of top-secret communications between a Russian scientist and what he believed to be his alien ancestors. Kaluga, Russia. May 1903. Little-known Russian schoolteacher Konstantin Tsiolkovsky publishes a landmark paper on rocket science, titled Exploration of Outer Space by Means of Rocket Devices. At a time when the Wright brothers are still working to achieve the first powered flight, Tsiolkovsky writes about groundbreaking concepts for the exploration of space, including what he calls the ideal rocket equation, a formula which calculates the amount of velocity needed to lift a body into outer space. Incredibly, his theories would prove instrumental in helping the Soviet Union launch the first man-made object into orbit more than 50 years later. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky wasn't a classically trained scientist. He was a secondary school math teacher, but he was so enamored with getting into space that he created the rocket science and mathematics in the early 1900s that led to the first thing created by humanity to be launched into space, Sputnik. To put into perspective how influential Tsiolkovsky's work was, this is the basis work that everybody had to use later. Brown used it during his research projects, and others sees the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation as the beginning of modern rocket science.
Tsiolkovsky was self-educated, so he had no resources, no abilities to go in some universities. And knowing that, it's very interesting how he was able to create his formulas and his ideas about space travel.
Where did he get those ideas? Where does his knowledge come from? His ideas about space and civilizations that populated were incredible, and he persisted that when humans will go into outer space, we will become like other alien civilizations.
Alien civilizations. How did a Russian math teacher who grew up in a small village in eastern Russia come to believe that there were other intelligent beings in the universe, and that it was mankind's destiny to join them in the cosmos?
mission is an alien transplant. And in going into space, we are actually going back home. From that perspective, it's very much in alignment with the ancient astronaut theory, where human beings strive to reconnect with these ancient gods through efforts like creating a more advanced space program.
What made Tsiolkovsky and others like him so certain that aliens existed and that space travel held the key to humans reconnecting with these otherworldly beings? For the answer, ancient astronaut theorists point to Tsiolkovsky's writings, in which he described extraterrestrial beings sending messages and information to mankind from the stars. He also wrote that he himself had personally received a number of interplanetary communications.
Tsiolkovsky experienced tremendous sightings in his life. One was in 1889. He was looking in the sky, and all of a sudden he saw a perfect cloud in the shape of a four-pointed cross flying over him. Tsiolkovsky really died universes in 1985. These forms of life were influencing and guiding human evolution and history. He also felt that he was receiving telepathic messages from extraterrestrials. This leads us to wonder, was he actually in contact with intelligences from out there? Did they guide his hand? Did they supply this equation?
Some of his models of what a spacecraft would look like are very much in line with the descriptions of various UFOs. This cigar elongated shape. Is he actually in communication with the beings that are piloting these craft? Is it a vision that he got showing how they manipulate and pilot these vehicles? And that's why he was able to come up with such an accurate representation for that model.
For many ancient astronaut theorists, Russia's widespread embrace of cosmism might help explain why the Soviet Union's reaction to the UFO incident at the Boosted Knoll was likely very different than the American military's reaction to Roswell. The United States approached the space race with an eye toward achieving scientific and technological superiority. The Soviet Union seemed less focused on technological goals, such as that of landing a man on the moon, and more interested in using space travel as a means of realizing a kind of extraterrestrial destiny. So the space race was really a problem for creating new technologies in our defense industry to create rockets that could launch a missile advanced into space, put a satellite into orbit. All these things require technological developments and enable spy satellites, they enable communication satellites, they enable intercontinental ballistic missiles.
The Russians were the first ones to promote this idea of unity between outer space and people on Earth. Tsiolkovsky knew there were other civilizations in outer space, and he wanted to meet them. He put the seeds in the minds of the people that helped develop rockets and space technology in the Soviet Union.
Maybe Cosmism and then the Russian successes with Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin made the Americans realize we need them. The Russians can do things we can't do. They have a philosophical outlook on this, which gives them an inherent advantage. And maybe in that sort of situation, each party brings something to the table.
Could it be that when the Soviets launched Sputnik, it wasn't simply a show of scientific superiority or military might, but an attempt to directly connect with extraterrestrial beings? And if so, could that have motivated the United States to work more closely with them and ultimately partner with them? Perhaps further clues can be found by examining what happened to the American and Soviet space programs after the Soviet Union collapsed. Moscow, Christmas Christmas Day, 1991.
I am now concluding my activity as President of the USSR.
In one of the most significant events of the 20th century, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev announces his resignation. Just 5 days short of its 70th anniversary, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is officially dissolved.
The Soviet Union collapsed 1989, 1990, 1991, and split up into its constituent republics. Russia at that time in the 1990s was a hellhole. Ethnic conflicts were brewing all around the borders of the Russian Federation, incredibly high levels of crime, the birth of the Russian mafia.
But of all the problems that now plague the former Soviet Union, their space program was not one of them. Their near-orbiting space station was considered a huge success, which often stood in stark contrast to the United States tragedy-plagued shuttle program. This contrast was so stark, in fact, that when the shuttle program quietly ended in 2011, the United States suspended its own manned space program in favor of sending its astronauts up to the International Space Station as little more than passengers aboard Russian Soyuz spacecraft.
It seems that the US ceded control of space to the Russians, certainly in relation to manned missions. But it is bizarre. For whatever reason, the Russians, despite all their problems, seem to be ahead of the US in some respects when you talk about space. A couple of examples of where the US seemed to have ceded control, or certainly ceded the leadership position in space to the Russians, are the International Space Station, where now American astronauts can't even get there without going up in Russian rockets.
For ancient astronaut theorists, the partnership between the two rival space programs was simply an admission of what had already been taking place in secret for decades. It also proved that both the US and Russian space programs were going to continue working together in the interest of furthering the goal of extraterrestrial contact. But this time, there was a difference. Russia was now largely controlled by deep-pocketed oligarchs and run by tight-gripped autocrats like Vladimir Putin. They were free of the kind of public scrutiny that would force full disclosure about just what they were doing in outer space.
If there are alien-human encounters taking place in space or in low Earth orbit, the Russians could bring back the information and share it with us.
There is a certain level of secrecy that is very different in Russia than it is in the United States. So it could be that most sensitive information is being handled by the Russian side. So to make sure that it doesn't get released and doesn't spook populations in different nations.
But while information coming out of Russia is now under tight control, the same could not be said for the period when the Soviet Union was imploding. And it was during this brief period that Russia's extensive history of extraterrestrial encounters became all but fully exposed.
In the waning days of the Soviet Union, a lot of interesting documents pertaining to UFOs were declassified. For example, the KGB so-called Blue File, 124 pages of information about UFO cases that came to the KGB. It was declassified. We know that most of the documents pertaining to the Setka program, which was the official Soviet top-secret UFO program which existed for 13 years, from 78 to 1991, most of those cases are not available. But the cases that we know about, that I've studied, are enough to make you amazed to no end of what they have discovered and what may be in store.
If the United States and the Soviet Union each experienced decades of extraterrestrial contact and had been secretly sharing their experiences and information with each other, what is their ultimate agenda? As far as ancient astronaut theorists are concerned, the answers can be found in recently revealed Russian research that is intended to change the human body to travel the galaxy. Voronezh, Russia. September 27th, 1989. A group of children playing in a park witness a shining ball in the sky that transforms into a disc-shaped craft and lands nearby. They see strange beings emerge from the craft, beings that do not appear to be human. In the days after the encounter, as many as 30 other eyewitnesses corroborate their account.
Many people were out and observed it, children as well as adults. Observers watched a hatch open and two beings come out, a very tall one and a modest-sized one. The tall one was described as rather mechanical looking, but a being that estimates were from 9 to 12 feet tall. The small one looked like a robot. Both were distinguished by very small heads. They began to move about the park. People reacted. One report has a boy in shock, the taller being pointing an apparatus at the boy and freezing him. He was reactivated, so to say, before the craft took off.
This is one of these cases where there are so many witnesses and they have all been interviewed and they're just all sincere. They all saw something. Some of the witnesses definitely describe those things as artificial looking and mechanical. Well, we ourselves seem to be moving in that direction. Are we creating ourselves as synthetic beings in the future? And the answer is we sure may be. That's the way it seems to be going.
If there are extraterrestrial beings visiting Earth, is it possible that they are not biological like us, but have adopted synthetic bodies better